It was the hour when film city wakes like a restless animal, cables calling, generators coughing, voices spilling from studio doors. Mumbai's light arrived late that morning, thin as a veil. On stage 4, a palace had been built out of plywood and patience, marigold garlands, mirror work, a staircase that led to nowhere but looked like it led to heaven. In that painted heaven stood Divya Bharti, 19 and already a constellation, waiting for the clap of the slate. She had the kind of face that audiences recognized before they remembered their own names. Photographers said her smile reached the lens faster than light. But what the lens never caught was the warmth before the smile, the quick glance toward the crew to check if the spot boy had a 10, if the hairdresser's child was sick, if the light man needed a moment to breathe. She was a young queen in a coat of deadlines and egos, but the crown she wore was made of curiosity and kindness. Playback ready, the music operator called. The air trembled with strings and tabla. Divya flexed her hands, the bangles chiming like polite thunder. The director barked, all departments, silence. A hush fell, broken only by the slow creak of the crane as the camera leaned in to admire her. For weeks, tabloids had announced this film as the next great romance, colors loud enough to wake the dead, emotions bigger than sky. Her co-star was a veteran whose fan clubs had weathered 3 recessions and a scandal. The supporting cast was a bouquet of familiar faces, a comic uncle, a mother who cried on cue, and a new addition, a second lead hero with a debutant's pride and a bull's certainty. His name was Rishabh Malhotra. He had grown up in a house where mirrors applauded. On that first morning, he arrived on set with sunglasses that refused to leave his face and a perfume that insisted on entering rooms before him. Divya greeted him with palms together. Namaste. He nodded without removing the glasses. We'll do great, she said. The script has sweetness. He shrugged. Sweetness we can add later. Screen presence first. Nobody paid it much mind. Film City is a bazaar of temperaments. The unit moved on. The scene was simple. A temple courtyard, a first meeting, a first misunderstanding. Divya's character, Meera, was to drop a basket of flowers, and Rishabh's Arjun was to help, gruffly, revealing a soft heart to the audience if not to her. The director explained rhythms, beats, glances. We'll do it in one take, he predicted, touching wood and then touching his forehead, as if both were equally holy. The first take flew like a kite in right wind, easy, soaring, applause waiting at the end. The director smiled behind his monitor, already imagining Friday collections. One more for safety, he said, because in cinema safety is superstition. The clap went down again. Divya turned, the basket fell, the petals scattered like confetti sent by God. She bent, and the camera dived to meet her eyes. Cut, the director called. Lovely. The crew loosened into chatter. A spot boy handed Divya water. She thanked him by name, as always. Rishabh removed his sunglasses at last, wiped a lens, and put them back on. The assistant director adjusted the schedule, scratching the paper with a pencil that had learned the set's exact humidity. Between shots, Divya stood near the edge of the set where the palace wall met the world. Through a gap, she could see real trees pretending to be part of the painted garden. She liked such illusions. They reminded her that the border between story and life was not a wall but a doorway. She was thinking about the scene to come, a small argument played for humor, when a junior artist passed too close and almost tripped on a coil of cable. Divya reached out and steadied the woman with a hand to her elbow. Careful, Behen, she said, and the woman nodded, embarrassed. It was a forgettable moment, the kind that evaporates even as it happens. But some moments are magnets in disguise, they pull other moments toward them, arranging a future no one can yet see. Ready for rehearsal? The choreographer called. The next sequence would be a light dance, nothing strenuous, just a skip of feet and a flick of eyes that declared, without declaring, that the story had begun. Rishabh arrived late to the floor, still on his phone, saying things like, brand synergy, and, my image. The choreographer waited with the patience of a schoolteacher who loves his worst student. Divya moved through the steps like a bird arranging air. Her body spoke fluent optimism. But when she landed the final pose, she saw out of the corner of her eye that Rishabh was not in position. He was talking to the camera crew, explaining how the lens should love him, how shadows should fear him. The camera crew had learned to nod while thinking of lunch. The director clapped his hands. Once more. Rishabh, please. The actor smirked. Director Saab, don't worry. I've been doing this since she was in school. It was meant as a joke. It found no laughter. Divya smiled, because she had taught herself to answer arrogance with grace. Then I will be your best student today, she said lightly. The crew exhaled. They ran the scene. On the third beat, Rishabh missed a step and bumped her shoulder. Not hard, just careless. The kind of contact the camera forgives if the heart does not. She steadied, made it look like choreography, and completed the phrase with a flourish big enough to hide his mistake. Applause. She laughed and bowed. He nodded as if the world had confirmed what he already knew. During lunch break, the set turned into a township of stainless steel dabbas and tea glasses. The makeup artist told the hairstylist about a cousin's wedding. The focus puller told anyone who would listen about a dream in which he finally became a director. Divya sat with her mother near the vanity van, sharing poha and stories. She kept one ear tuned to the floor because listening was her superstition. She heard Rishabh before she saw him. His voice carried like a radio someone forgot to switch off. These new girls, he said to a small crowd of young men, they think crying on cue is acting. Put them without glycerin and see. They'll melt. It was clumsy arrogance, second-hand cruelty. Divya pretended not to hear. Silence can be a decency. It can also be a shield. But the words did not stop. Also, he added, lowering his voice to the volume of a cheap secret, some of them smile their way to roles. Talent is a bonus. A few boys laughed, not because it was funny, but because fear turns into laughter when it cannot turn into courage. Divya placed her dabba down. Her mother touched her wrist. Beta, she murmured, an entire sentence hidden in one word. Divya nodded. I know, she said. Let the work speak. Work spoke. The afternoon scene stitched together with professional calm. In a close shot, her eyes held a horizon. In a mid-shot, her hands braided patience into gesture. The director whispered, perfect, the way a man whispers a prayer he didn't know he knew. Rishabh performed adequately, which is to say, he hit his marks and thought that was art. Sunlight drifted across the set until it was replaced by the blue of electric evening. The last shot of the day required silence, candlelight, the delicate music of anklets. Divya stood on the palace staircase, a small flame cupped in her palms. The camera crept forward like a careful animal. Action, the director said softly, as if speaking to God. She took 2 steps, the world lost interest in everything that was not her. Somewhere behind the lights, Rishabh cleared his throat, loudly. It startled the extras, a candle trembled, a grip cursed under breath. Divya continued, saving the take with a softness that looked like devotion. Cut, the director sighed, both pleased and annoyed. We'll go again. They reset. Silence gathered. Action. She stepped, eyes bright, flame steady. And from the shadows, the new hero laughed. A dismissive, adolescent sound, the kind of laugh that tries to make a girl smaller because it cannot make itself big enough. The flame shivered. The shot died. The silence did not. Several heads turned. The director took off his headphones. The choreographer closed his eyes. Divya looked toward the darkness where the laugh had been born and waited, not with anger, not with injury, but with an attention so calm that it felt like a test the set did not know it was taking. Somewhere deep in that calm, the story we are telling found its body. Because what happened next, and the way it happened, would travel through studios and screenwriters and gossip columns and, more importantly, through human memory, until it became one of those rare anecdotes that grows kind as it grows old. For now, it was only evening on stage 4, a candle searching for stillness, a young actress with a straight spine, and 100 witnesses who would, by the end of the next scene, claim they had always believed in grace. The night ended heavy with unspoken words. But by morning the studio had rebuilt its rhythm. A new schedule, a new costume, the same myth of professionalism. Divya arrived early, wrapped in a pale blue sari, her hair pinned with white jasmine. She greeted every technician as if the previous evening's tension had been a fever the set could sweat out. Rishabh arrived late again. His entourage spilled laughter like perfume. The director, tired of tantrums, looked to Divya. "Can we begin?" She nodded, calm. "Let's give the camera something worth remembering." The scene was simple on paper, a quarrel between lovers outside a temple, but the script demanded a spark of defiance, the kind that burns only when truth touches ego. Divya read the lines once more. "You think fame is love? Then you've never been loved." She smiled at the irony. Action. The moment the camera rolled, she transformed. Her eyes held storms, her voice folded power and pain like two notes of the same song. The crew watched in stillness. Rishabh stumbled through his cue, forgetting half his dialogue, then blamed the echo. The director called, "Cut. Reset." The actor threw the script on the floor. "Maybe if people on set respected experience, we'd finish faster," he snapped, glancing toward Divya. The words carried venom shaped like charm. "Some of us actually trained before we became headlines." The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. A lightman muttered a prayer. The assistant director froze mid-step. Divya turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "If experience teaches respect," she said quietly, "then I am still your teacher." Her tone wasn't sharp. It was soft, deliberate, a calm that made the insult sound smaller than dust. The director swallowed a grin. "Take 5, he ordered. Rishabh stormed off toward the vanity van. The gossip would later say he broke a mirror. Others swore he broke only his pride. Divya remained on set, asking the crew if anyone needed water. When someone handed her a stool, she refused. "Let's not rest anger," she said. "Let's rest truth." In the next take, she carried that calm into the scene. Every line she spoke cut through the air like silk through smoke. The camera drank it greedily. Even the assistant director forgot to call, "Cut." When the shot ended, the crew erupted in applause. Divya bowed her head, embarrassed by the attention. "Don't clap," she said with a smile. "Just roll the next one before the magic runs away." By lunchtime, word of the confrontation had traveled beyond the studio walls. Assistants whispered in corridors, reporters sniffed for scandal. But those who had been present told the story differently. They said it wasn't a fight, it was a lesson, delivered without cruelty. Late that afternoon, Rishabh returned, sunglasses hiding what shame could not. He avoided her eyes. The director paired them again for a close-up. Divya greeted him with the same warmth as always. "Ready?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Ready." The camera rolled. Their faces filled the frame, his stiff, hers luminous. When she delivered the final line, a single tear slipped free, unscripted and real. The director whispered, "Perfect." No one spoke of the earlier insult again, but everyone carried the echo of her dignity. In an industry that often confused volume with strength, Divya had reminded them that grace could be louder than rage. As the crew packed up, the light outside turned golden. She stood by the doorway, watching the sun sink behind the studio gates. "Another day," she murmured, half to herself, half to the universe. "Another lesson." And somewhere inside the metal heart of the camera, the film kept turning, capturing the quiet revolution of a young woman who had just changed the definition of power. The next morning, the studio smelled of wet paint and burnt coffee. Rain had soaked Mumbai during the night, and the puddles outside reflected a grey sky heavy with unfinished thoughts. Inside stage 6, another film world was taking shape: chandeliers, temple bells, pillars painted gold but made of plaster. Divya arrived on time as always, hair tied in a braid, eyes calm, voice kind. The director of photography tested his lens angels while the assistant director scurried around with short lists and reminders. Divya greeted the camera crew with her usual smile. "Good morning, brothers," she said. "Let's make this one a good day." Rishabh came 20 minutes late, chewing gum, pretending he didn't notice the hosh that followed him. He had spent the previous night with friends bragging that nothing on set could shake him. His pride, swollen and fragile, demanded an audience. When he finally reached his mark, the director sighed, "Let's not waste light." Scene 14 be the argument by the fountain. He turned to Divya. "You cry," he shouts, "we find truth somewhere in the middle." "Simple, no." She laughed softly. Truth is never simple, sir. But I'll try. The camera rolled. Divya stepped into the light, her expression already trembling between heartbreak and grace. Rishabh delivered his lines with more volume than emotion, slamming a prop voice that shattered across the marble floor. Divya jumped. The glass grazed her ankle, leaving a thin red mark. She looked at it, then back at him, a flicker of pain behind composure. The director called, "Cut. That's too rough." But Rishabh smirked. "If you want real emotion, you can't be afraid of reality," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Divya straightened, voice steady. "Reality doesn't require disrespect." He shrugged. "Maybe for you. Some of us learned acting, not posing." The crew froze. The makeup artist lowered her brush. The sound engineer's hand trembled on the fader. In the silence that followed, even the rain outside seemed to stop falling. The director opened his mouth, but Divya lifted a hand. "It's okay," she said quietly. Then she turned to Rishabh. "You're right. Some of us are still learning. So, teach me how to insult someone and call it art." Her tone was light, her face almost smiling, but every word struck with surgical precision. She didn't raise her voice once. That calmness made the insult sound smaller than a sigh. He laughed awkwardly, looking around for allies, but no one returned the smile. The camera operator adjusted his lens to avoid meeting his eyes. Divya looked at the director. "May I have 2 minutes?" He nodded, still unsure if he should intervene. She stepped away from the set and sat on the edge of the fountain, removing her anklet to clean the cut on her foot. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The entire crew watched, unsure whether they were witnessing an actress preparing for a scene or a woman reclaiming her dignity in silence. When she returned, she didn't look at Rishabh. "Let's go again," she said. "Same lines. But this time, let's not confuse pain with power." The director hesitated, then whispered, "Roll camera." The scene began anew. This time, the hurt in her eyes wasn't from acting. It was truth, distilled. Her voice trembled in just the right places, her breath caught like a bird between beats of thunder. Rishabh tried to match her energy, but he drowned in her stillness. When she said, "You don't need to break things to prove you exist," the room felt it. The director's throat tightened. "Cut," he said softly. "That's it. We have it." The crew exhaled in unison. The sound man wiped his eyes with the corner of his shirt. Even Rishabh stood frozen, shame flickering behind the mask of arrogance. Divya smiled faintly and looked toward the crew. "See?" she said gently. "Respect creates better art." No one clapped. They didn't dare break the spell. After the take, Rishabh tried to apologize, mumbling something about method acting. Divya shook her head. "Method is about truth, not ego. We serve the story, not ourselves." Her words spread through the studio like perfume, subtle, lasting, unforgettable. By lunchtime, every makeup room, cafeteria table, and production office was whispering the same thing. Divya didn't fight back. She rose above. That afternoon, when they shot a romantic song sequence, the energy had changed. The crew moved quieter. The extras smiled softer. Even the lights seemed to burn warmer. Some said it was professionalism. Others said it was Divya. Whatever it was, everyone agreed on one thing. They had seen something holy in a place built for illusion. For a few days, the set existed in a hush that wasn't quite peace. It was the kind of quiet that follows thunder, air-charged, waiting. Everyone acted polite, efficient, professional. Yet behind every, "Yes, madam," or "Ready, sir," was the shared memory of that moment by the fountain. Divya arrived each morning precisely on time, her script marked neatly, her smile steady. Rishabh came early too now, suddenly disciplined, quieter, no entourage in sight. He spoke less and listened more, though guilt had a way of leaking from his eyes whenever they met hers. The director, sensing the unspoken tension, filled the days with quick shots and lighter scenes, comic relief, dance rehearsals, crowd sequences, anything that kept emotion busy and words mechanical. Still, under that surface, something deeper brewed. Admiration for her, discomfort with him, and a strange electricity that made even routine moments feel monumental. On the third day, they were filming a marketplace sequence, bright colors, vendors shouting, background dancers moving in loops like tides. Divya's costume sparkled under the lights, her laughter carried into the rafters. It was as if she had decided that joy itself would be her rebellion. Between takes, the sound assistant dropped a mic pack. Divya bent to help, and Rishabh, instinctively, reached too. Their hands met briefly over the metal box. She smiled, a small, forgiving thing, and said, "Careful. These sets break easily." He nodded. "Yes, they do." The director, watching from behind the camera, exhaled for the first time in days. The storm, it seemed, had passed. But storms are strange creatures. They don't always end, sometimes they wait. That afternoon brought the emotional climax of the film, a confrontation scene, both characters standing in rain, confessing love through anger. Artificial rain machines hissed, thunder playback echoed, and technicians ran around covering electrical cables with plastic sheets. Divya stood barefoot in the puddles, ready. Rishabh joined her, eyes uncertain but focused. The director clapped his hands together. "Okay, listen. We do this in one go. No drama. Just truth." He looked straight at Rishabh when he said it. The assistant shouted, "Rolling. Action." Rain poured. Divya's hair clung to her face, eyes fierce and alive. She delivered her first line, a plea wrapped in defiance, and stepped forward. Rishabh shouted his cue, voice cracking louder than the thunder. The scene burned with intensity. Even the camera operator forgot to blink. Then, in the middle of a take, a power cable sparked and went dark. The lights flickered out, leaving only the sound of rain and breathing. Someone yelled, "Cut power." Technicians scrambled. The rain stopped. The silence returned. Divya stood there, drenched, shaking slightly, not from cold, but from something heavier. She looked at Rishabh through the dim emergency light. He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand gently. "Do you know why that scene worked?" she asked softly. He frowned. "Because we felt it." "No," she said. "Because, for once, you stopped performing and started feeling." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was kind, almost maternal. And that kindness landed harder than any insult could have. The power came back. The crew, drenched but silent, went back to positions. But the mood had shifted again. Something invisible, something sacred, had taken hold of the space. Later that evening, when most of the crew had gone, Divya stayed behind, sitting on the temple steps of the set. Her mother came over with a towel. "You don't have to carry everyone's lessons, Beta," she whispered. Divya smiled faintly. "If not me, then who will?" The rain outside the studio had stopped, but drops still slid down from the studio roof, echoing like applause that refused to fade. Somewhere, a night bird sang. And if anyone had listened closely enough, they might have heard the city itself whisper, "Not yet. The storm hasn't finished teaching." The next morning, the city smelled of wet dust and incense. A quiet Sunday, heavy with reflection. The studio corridors echoed only with the clatter of teacups and the low hum of machines waking for another day of make-believe. Divya arrived before anyone else, her white kurta fluttering like a flag of peace. She sat near the set's temple wall, reading her script, lips moving silently. When the director came in, still carrying the fatigue of sleeplessness, he was surprised to see her there. "You're early," he said. She smiled without looking up. "I wanted to remember why we do this." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. By 10 o'clock, the crew gathered. The schedule pinned on the board read, Scene 19C, Emotional Monologue. Single take. It was the hardest scene in the film, her character confronting the man she loved after betrayal. On paper, it was simple dialogue. But the soul of the story depended on it. If she failed, the film would collapse. Rishabh arrived on time, clean-shaven, quiet, and alone. The arrogance that had once walked ahead of him now lagged somewhere behind, limping. He looked at Divya, uncertain if he should speak. She spared him the burden. "Let's make it real today," she said, adjusting her dupatta. He nodded. "I'll follow your lead." The director cleared his throat. Everyone ready? Lights rolling. Sound rolling. Camera. Action. The air turned electric. Divya stood in the middle of the set, rain still dripping from the previous night scene, floor slick, air cold. Her eyes were calm, too calm. The kind of calm that hides oceans. You think love is about pride, she began, voice low. You think silence is strength. Her tone trembled slightly, and the camera moved closer. But strength isn't breaking someone to feel tall. It's holding them steady when the world tilts. Rishabh stepped into frame, face pale, eyes darting. The lines he had memorized vanished. The emotion in her voice hit him like rain after drought. He whispered, I never meant to hurt you. Divya's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. I know, she said, but meaning well doesn't undo the wound. She turned her back to him and spoke her final line directly into the void, as if to the audience, as if to every wound she had ever endured. When respect dies, love becomes just a performance. And I am done performing. The camera held the shot. No one dared breathe. When the director finally whispered, cut, no one moved. The silence was sacred. Even the lights hummed softer. Then, slowly, the crew began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder, fuller, unstoppable. It wasn't applause for a movie scene. It was gratitude for witnessing truth. Rishabh stood motionless, his own eyes wet. He didn't clap. He couldn't. He simply looked at her, the person he had tried to overshadow, and realized he had never really seen her before. Divya, still in character, looked around as if waking from a trance. Was that okay? She asked gently. The director laughed through tears. Okay? You just saved the film. Someone handed her a shawl. Another offered tea. She accepted both, saying softly, keep that shot safe. It wasn't mine. It was hers. Hers? The assistant asked. Divya smiled. The woman every actress carries inside, the one who's tired of pretending weakness is grace. That evening, when the crew replayed the footage, something strange happened. During her final line, a faint glimmer appeared on screen, a drop of light drifting across her shoulder like a small flame. No one could explain it. The lighting team swore no reflection existed at that angle. The director replayed it 3 times. Rishabh said quietly, maybe it's her soul, leaving the pain behind. Divya didn't answer. She only watched the screen and whispered, maybe it's what truth looks like when it finally breathes. Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, the applause of heaven rehearsing for something greater still to come. The following day dawned quiet, the kind of morning that carried both relief and regret. The studio lot, usually buzzing with chaos, felt like a temple. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe reverence, but everyone who walked in that day spoke in softer tones, as if unwilling to disturb what Divya had created in the air. Rishabh was already there. For the first time since filming began, he stood alone without his assistants, phone, or mirror. The arrogance that once sat heavy on his shoulders had slipped away, leaving only a man who looked painfully human. When Divya arrived, dressed simply in a pastel salwar kameez, he approached her slowly. She turned, eyes gentle but unreadable. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally said, I owe you an apology. She tilted her head, half smiling. For which day? There were many. He winced, then laughed awkwardly. For all of them. I was stupid. I thought respect was something people owed me because of who I thought I was. And now? She asked. He looked down. Now I know it's something you earn by how you treat others. Divya's gaze softened. That's a start. She gestured toward a bench by the studio garden. Sit. I'll have my tea. You can have your honesty. They sat. The early sunlight scattered across the grass, catching dust motes that floated like lazy dreams. The distant clang of a hammer echoed from another set. Life, relentless and ordinary, moved on. Rishabh spoke slowly, carefully, as if afraid his words might break something fragile. You didn't shout back that day, he said. You could have destroyed me in front of everyone. But you didn't. Why? She sipped her tea. Because when someone throws mud, shouting only helps it stick. Silence lets it dry and fall away. He stared at her. You make it sound easy. It isn't, she said softly. But it's the only way to stay clean in an industry that feeds on noise. He nodded, eyes glistening. You taught me more about acting than anyone ever did. She chuckled. No, I didn't. I only reminded you that the camera records truth, not attitude. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt more like healing than absence. A crew member passed by, greeted her respectfully, and offered her flowers left from the previous day's shoot. Divya accepted them, then handed one to Rishabh. For peace, she said simply. He took it as if it were a medal. You forgive too easily. I forgive quickly. She corrected. Not easily. There's a difference. A small breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of jasmine, the same she wore every day. For Rishabh, it would become the smell of redemption. Later that afternoon, they filmed together again, an intimate scene, two characters reconciling after misunderstanding. But something deeper than performance filled the air. It was as though the apology had stitched something back into the fabric of the film. The director noticed it immediately. The chemistry today, he whispered to the cinematographer. Where did this come from? The cameraman smiled. Respect. You can light it, but you can't fake it. As the scene ended, Rishabh looked at Divya and mouthed, thank you. She didn't respond with words, just a small nod that said everything. When shooting wrapped that evening, most of the crew stayed behind longer than usual. Nobody wanted the day to end. They joked, shared samosas, teased the lighting man for falling asleep mid-take. For the first time in weeks, laughter returned to the set. Divya, sitting by the monitor, looked around and whispered to the director, see? Harmony always finds its way back. He nodded. Because you create it. She smiled but didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth had already filled the room. Before leaving, Rishabh approached once more. If they ever make a film about you, he said, they'll call it The Woman Who Taught Bollywood How to Be Kind. She laughed. No one would watch that. People prefer drama. Maybe, he said. But someday they'll realize kindness is the biggest drama of all. She looked at him, touched his shoulder lightly, and said, then keep that script alive. He nodded and walked away, lighter than when he'd arrived. As the studio lights dimmed, Divya lingered near the empty set. She looked up at the chandeliers that had once witnessed arrogance, pain, and forgiveness, and whispered, lesson learned, for all of us. The reflection of the lights shimmered in her eyes, tiny stars that refused to go out. Outside, night settled over Mumbai, carrying the faint echo of her laughter, the kind that heals without trying. News travels faster than light in Bollywood, faster, even, than gossip. By the end of that week, stories about what had happened on set had spread through studios, cafes, and the corridors of power like a rumor touched by reverence. Every version was slightly different, but they all shared one truth. Divya Bharti had turned disrespect into grace. Producers mentioned her name in meetings as an example of professionalism. Actresses quoted her lines in interviews, especially that one sentence that had become legend. When someone throws mud, silence lets it dry and fall away. Magazines wrote about her with newfound awe. For once, the headlines didn't focus on her looks, her youth, or her rumored marriage. They spoke of her poise, her character, her dignity. In a world that worshipped scandal, kindness had somehow gone viral. At Film City, the set that had witnessed everything was being dismantled. Wooden pillars lay stacked near the door, fake flowers wilted under the weight of dust, and yet, the space felt alive, like it remembered. Some of the crew stayed behind longer than required, unwilling to pack away the memories. One of them, the camera assistant, later told a journalist. It was strange. After she finished that monologue, the air itself changed. We all knew we had seen something bigger than cinema. Meanwhile, Divya kept working as if nothing had happened. She attended charity events, visited her tailor, fed stray dogs outside Mehboob Studios, and carried on filming 2 more projects back-to-back. But those close to her noticed a subtle shift. She spoke less about fame and more about people. Her diary entries, once filled with schedules, now carried quiet reflections. You can't control how others act, but you can decide what their actions make of you. Rishabh, too, changed. The tabloids noticed. He stopped showing up at parties, started doing theatre workshops, and once, during an interview, when asked about the incident, he said, "Divya taught me that the loudest voice on a set should always belong to truth." The reporter smiled, assuming it was metaphor. But Rishabh meant every word. A month later, during a major award ceremony, Divya arrived wearing a simple ivory sari. No jewels, no designer logos, just grace. When her name was called for Best Actress, the applause felt different. It wasn't for the trophy. It was for everything that couldn't fit inside it. She took the stage, smiled shyly, and spoke without reading the cue cards. Sometimes people think respect is something you demand. But respect isn't fear, it's love that remembers. If I have earned even a little of that tonight, I'm grateful. The auditorium stood still, the kind of stillness that only honesty can command. Backstage, Rishabh waited near the corridor, holding a single rose. When she passed, he handed it to her quietly. "No words today?" he said. She nodded. "Good. Some stories speak better in silence." Weeks passed. The world spun faster around her. Movie offers multiplied, fan letters flooded her doorstep. But Divya seemed to drift towards something beyond fame, something softer, quieter. She started writing poetry, mostly about kindness and time. One verse read, "I learned that storms bow to calm. And calm is not weakness. It's knowing you can break the sky, and choosing not to." Her closest friends said she'd found peace. But peace, like destiny, often arrives before its reason. One evening, as shooting wrapped on another film, the director of her previous project visited the set. He watched her perform a simple line, just 3 words, "I forgive you," and he whispered to a technician beside him, "That's not acting anymore. That's who she is." He was right. Divya Bharti wasn't merely performing kindness, she had become it. And like all beautiful things that burn too bright, the world was learning to look at her carefully, afraid the light might fade too soon. It happened quietly, as all eternal things do. There was no announcement, no grand revelation, only whispers that turned into stories, and stories that turned into truth. Years passed. The film they had made together released to enormous success. Critics praised its honesty, audiences cried during the final scene, the one where Divya said, "When respect dies, love becomes just a performance." No one knew those words had been born from something real. No one knew that behind that calm, she had fought a battle the world would never see. Rishabh avoided interviews for months after the premiere. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "I've worked with dozens of actors," he said, "but only one saint." The journalist laughed, thinking it was exaggeration. But Rishabh wasn't smiling. "You can replace beauty with fame, but you can't replace grace," he said. And she had more of it than any of us deserved. Soon, the story of that day on set, the insult, the calm, the forgiveness, became a legend whispered in dressing rooms, film schools, and vanity vans. Young actresses repeated her words like a mantra. Respect creates better art. Directors invoked her example whenever tempers flared. Assistants told new crew members, "Remember the Divya rule. Never raise your voice, raise your work." Even years later, people who had never met her spoke of her as if they had. They described her with the reverence reserved for myth. She was light. She was kindness with a spine. She didn't act. She became what every scene needed her to be. In time, Bollywood changed. Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. More women rose to power on sets, and more men learned to listen. Award speeches began to thank grace alongside talent. And in every studio hallway, her portrait hung quietly beside the greats, Madhubala, Meena Kumari, and now, Divya Bharti. Her photograph always caught the light differently, as if refusing to fade. Rishabh visited that portrait every year on her birthday. He would bring a single white jasmine flower, the scent she always wore, and place it beneath the frame. Once, a young actor asked him why he still came. Rishabh smiled faintly. "Because she forgave me before I forgave myself." He looked at the photo again, her eyes frozen in eternal warmth. "She showed me, He whispered, "That real strength is silence that heals instead of noise that hurts." In 2003, a Film Institute introduced a new annual award, the Divya Bharti Award for Grace Under Pressure. The plaque read, "For the artist who proves that power is kindness performed with courage." Winners often cried when they accepted it. They said it made them want to be better humans, not just better actors. Decades later, one journalist revisited Stage 6, the same studio where everything had happened. It was abandoned now, quiet, its walls chipped, the fountain long dry. She walked through the dust, imagining what it had looked like when the lights were on and the rain machines hissed. She whispered into the emptiness, "Divya, are you still here?" And just as she turned to leave, a single spotlight flickered on, faint, golden, steady, illuminating the exact spot where Divya had once stood. The journalist froze. The air smelled faintly of jasmine. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Of course you are," she said. "Even now, somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and applause, there's a place where she still dances, barefoot, free, laughing the way only innocence can." The sound of her anklets echoes softly through the corridors of time, reminding those who listen that greatness isn't measured by how loud you speak, but by how deeply you make others feel. And so, when people speak of Divya Bharti today, they don't talk about tragedy. They talk about the girl who changed Bollywood without raising her voice. The one who taught a generation that respect is the purest form of art. Because legends don't need endings, only echoes. And somewhere, in that eternal silence between action and cut, Divya Bharti still smiles, lighting the world with the calm that once silenced cruelty and turned it into love.